When we look at the story of the spies, we see something which perhaps explains the entire episode. Initially, when the spies come back with their report, they say all kinds of things. They speak about the land, they speak about the fruit, they speak about the inhabitants. There's one thing they don't mention along the way, and that is God. God's not part of the narrative. God isn't there. And perhaps once you realize that, the understanding that there's fear or the chances of actually entering the land without God being with us is, of course, going to be minimal. Which means their conclusion is a foregone conclusion if God is not part of the picture. When you look at the response that Kalev gives to them, Kalev also doesn't mention God, but he does say something. He goes, the land which we are inheriting, which means he understands the land was given to us. It means that he understands the land was given to us by God, and it is our rightful inheritance, because this is part of the promise that God gave to Abraham. Which means it's really interesting that Kalev argues with them in terms of our ability to take the land and to inherit the land and to enter the land to be ours. And he understands what the problem is, and he does not confront them head on in terms of the underlying reason for their fear. He stops. He hints at it. But what happens afterwards is the problem then metastasizes, and God finally enters into the picture. When the people cry and they say, the reason this is going to happen to us, this terrible thing, we're going to enter into the land and we're going to be slaughtered and so on, is because God hates us. Which means you now realize that the dysfunctional relationship with God is the core of the issue. At the first stage, the problem is they don't mention God in terms of helping them. They don't see God as somebody who could or should or would or will help us. Rather, God is not part of the picture when there's something positive. But when something bad happens, oh, that was God. God is the one who's going to do all the terrible things to us. Which means this dysfunctional relationship, which seems to somehow have formed, is that God is responsible for all the bad in our lives, and God is not capable of doing anything which is good. And if we continue looking for God throughout the whole narrative, we'll realize this is in fact the issue. And they turn and they say, in the positive spies, namely Kalev and Yeshua, say, don't rebel against God. But the rebellion against God is one of thought, it's one of the heart. Which means we really need to understand that there is a God who created and sustains the universe. And this God indeed is responsible when things happen to us which are challenging. But God is also there when things are good. And it's true, we thank God for the good and we thank God for the bad. And unfortunately, sometimes we need to thank God for the bad. But it's because we realize that God is responsible. They don't realize that. They don't realize that God is capable of good. They don't realize that God does look out for us. They don't realize, like Kalev did, that God gave us this land as inheritance. They don't realize that sometimes we need to say, Baruch Hashem, and thank God for the good things in our lives. And this really is the response ultimately to the spies. I know there are many responses. One of the responses is coming to the land of Israel and living in the land of Israel and appreciating the land of Israel. Realizing the land of Israel is the inheritance that God gave to the Jewish people. But there you have it, that God gave to the Jewish people. And God gave this to us not because he hates us. God gave us this land because he absolutely loves us.